You were never supposed to know this story, and yet here you are drawn into a forbidden history buried beneath layers of silence and ash. The Holloway Hotel was once the proud centerpiece of a mountain town, a fortress of stone and timber that stood against the storms of the Ozarks. Its halls carried the laughter of travelers, the clinking of glasses, the whispers of deals struck in shadow. But beneath its foundation, something older than the town itself waited, and the Holloway family knew it. The year was 1900 when the first cracks began to show, not in the walls but in the lives of those who dared to look too closely. Margaret Holloway, the matriarch with steel in her eyes, kept the ledgers, but also kept secrets. She insisted the basement be reinforced with imported iron beams far stronger than anything the hotel actually needed. She claimed it was for safety, but the miners who dug deep into the rock beneath swore they heard water whispering, not flowing like a spring, but whispering like breath against their skin. Those shafts they dug became the core of the Holloway curse, for in the belly of the earth lay a well not marked on any survey, not listed in any deed, a well that seemed to drink more than water, a well that drank time, memory, and even flesh. Guests vanished without record, workers disappeared between paydays, but their names were crossed out in ledgers in Margaret's sharp hand. The townsfolk whispered, but dared not accuse, for the Holloways fed them, gave them work, and kept their debts tied up in tidy knots. The fire that would consume the Holloway Hotel came suddenly, its flames licking skyward, as if drawn by something hungry in the foundation. Yet survivors swore the fire did not start in the kitchens or lamps, but from below, rising upward as if the earth itself had ignited, and when the ruins cooled, the wells remained untouched like black mouths waiting to feed again. The story was bew, right under claims of accident and insurance fraud. But the journals of a single guest, a traveling preacher, told a darker tale. He wrote of hollow prayers that fell flat in the hotel chapel of nights when the walls dripped with condensation. Though the fires had long gone cold, of Margaret herself, kneeling by the old iron grate, whispering words no congregation should ever hear. This is where our descent begins, into what was hidden beneath Black Hollow, into the truth that the Holloway curse was never meant to be erased. The ruins of the Holloway Hotel should have been abandoned after the fire, yet men with lanterns and shovels returned again and again, drawn not by the promise of rebuilding, but by what remained below. The well had survived untouched by flame or collapse, standing like a wound in the earth. The first men who dared approach it claimed the air grew heavy, the deeper they descended. Some said they heard water, though none could see it. Others claimed voices rose from the shaft, soft and pleading like children lost in the dark. A local sheriff named Elias documented several of these reports before his own disappearance. His journal survived, found in a locked drawer at the courthouse. He wrote that the Holloway family refused all attempts to seal the well. Margaret herself bribed masons to reinforce the stone walls around it, ensuring its permanence, when the rest of the structure was left to rot. But why preserve a wound? Why guard a thing that clearly consumed those who came near? The sheriff suspected ritual, a cycle that demanded sacrifice, though he never discovered who or what the well was meant to feed. He warned in his final entry that something below was not simply waiting, but watching. The survivors of the fire spoke little of that night, but one chambermaid, broken with fear, claimed she had seen Margaret leading guests down into the basement hours before the fire erupted. She said they followed willingly, as if entranced, their faces calm, their voices silent. When she tried to intervene, Margaret struck her across the face and whispered a single word she could never bring herself to repeat. The woman vanished within a year. Some say into the woods, others say into the well itself. By 1905, the ruins had grown over vines crawling up charred beams, the hotel erased except for its legend. But the townspeople never built over it. They left the hollow to the forest as though afraid that covering it might rouse whatever was buried below. Hunters, who wandered too close, spoke of shadows moving against the tree line. Even on moonless nights, cold air exhaled from the ruins as if the well itself breathed. The Holloway name faded from records. Descendants changed their names, fled westward, but those who knew the truth whispered that Margaret never left. that she descended with the fire into the well itself, offering herself to the thing she had served for decades. And if that were true, then she was not gone at all, but waiting beneath the stones, waiting for another fire, another offering, another descent. By the time Frederick Holloway returned in 1937, the place was nothing but broken walls and a foundation that seemed to sink deeper into the ground each year. Yet the promise of profit drove him to rebuild. He was warned by his father's letters to never disturb the basement, never open the eastern foundation, never approach the well. But desperation in the Depression leaves men deaf to warning voices. He hired crews from Springfield who tore away the charred remains of the eastern wing, and it was then that the first discovery was made. The second shaft appeared beside the original well, narrow, dark, breathing a stench like rotting meat left in the sun. The men who found it swore the stones sweated as if alive. One claimed the ground pulled at his boots like hands reaching from beneath. He quit, the next morning refusing his pay. The others stayed, but fear took hold. Rumors spread through town that the Holloway property was cursed and that its foundations were not made for men, but for something older, deeper. The Newton County Gazette ran a small article about the shaft, calling it Abandoned Well Works from Pioneer Days. The truth was darker. Workers whispered about metal tracks bolted into the stone walls leading downward into blackness, rusted but deliberate, as though some machine had once traveled the shaft. County officials ordered it sealed, poured concrete until the earth drank more than they calculated, almost double. Still, it sank away, as if swallowed. One worker later confessed that as they finished, he heard movement far below, like something shifting under the weight of stone and wet cement. He said the sound was not settling earth, it was breathing, hungry, restless. The Gazette moved on. The county moved on, but the men who sealed it never spoke freely again. In taverns after too much drink, one of them admitted that he dreamed of faces in the stone walls that whispered his name until he woke Geo. Asping. He would not walk near the ruins even in daylight. What the public did not know, what the Holloway bloodline knew in silence, was that there were not two shafts, but three arranged in a perfect triangle, like a design too precise to be chance. And from each one, narrow channels carved into stone reached like veins into the bones of the hotel, connecting foundation to room to chamber, as if the building itself had been designed to feed the earth. The Holloway Hotel reopened in the summer of 1938 under a new name, the Blackwater Inn, a name chosen to mask the past, though the locals still whispered the old one. The first guests were traveling salesmen drifters, families moving west seeking work. They stayed in rooms 27, 29, and 31, the very rooms that decades later would be found with strange hinges hidden in their floors. Though no one spoke of it aloud, the staff began to notice that not all guests checked out. Some vanished without paying their bill. Their belongings found neatly folded or hastily abandoned, as if interrupted mid-act. One maid recounted seeing a family of 3 enter room 29 with luggage and laughter. The next morning the room was silent. The beds unslept, the lamps unlit their suitcases. Gone, not carried but gone. She quit that same night terrified, and was later institutionalized after wandering into the woods, barefoot muttering about voices that called her through the floorboards. The local sheriff dismissed the reports as desertion or robbery, but rumors grew. A grocer who delivered food to the inn swore he heard a hollow groaning echo from beneath the dining hall when no one was below. The cook said, the pantry door rattled, though no draft could reach it, and the owner, Frederick Holloway, grew thinner, restless, pacing the hallways at night, as if listening for something. He kept ledgers meticulous in detail, but never showed them to anyone. Guests still came and coins still changed hands. But the town began to avoid the inn. Those who stayed were outsiders who did not know the whispers. Some returned safely, most did not. And the building itself seemed to change. The plaster in the east wing cracked in long vertical seams, as though something beneath pressed upward. The floors sometimes trembled faintly without earthquake, without storm, as if the ground shifted in hunger beneath. The housekeepers told of water seeping through the walls, not rainwater but something thicker, darker, staining the stone. And Frederick himself was heard muttering at night alone in his office. "If the well feeds, it spares us. If the well feeds, it spares us." His wife left him in 1939, carrying their child away from the house. She told neighbors he prayed not to God but to something else, something he called the embrace. The trap doors were discovered by accident in the winter of 1940, when a storm ripped shingles from the roof and water poured down through the upper floors. One of the maids slipped in the dining hall, where the boards swelled and buckled beneath the weight of the flood. A corner of the floor collapsed, revealing iron hinges, bolted into oak, and a recessed handle hidden beneath the warped planks. The sheriff was called yet. When he arrived, Frederick Holloway intercepted him, insisting the door led only to storage. He opened it himself with an old brass key, and indeed there was a ladder descending into darkness. The smell that rose from below was not storage, but rot, damp earth and rust. The sheriff descended only halfway, before climbing back up, his face pale. He told Holloway to seal it and told the maid to forget what she had seen. That night, Holloway was seen in the hall, dragging sacks one by one toward the trap door. The sound of the iron latch echoed through the corridors long after. The guests upstairs swore they heard splashes followed by silence. Over time, others noticed more. Such doors appeared in rooms 27, 29, and 31, each one concealed beneath the rugs, each one fastened with the same iron hinges, each one smelling faintly of wet stone and iron. Guests, who lingered too long in those rooms, complained of sleeplessness of hearing a low chanting beneath the floor. Some wrote letters home describing muffled cries, as if a woman were sobbing through the wood, but those letters were found unsent in abandoned luggage. And yet the sheriff never returned. The town never questioned. At the edge of the inn, the windows rattled without wind. The mirrors sweated condensation like breath from something trapped inside. The few who spoke openly told of seeing Holloway enter the well at night, candle in hand, his figure swallowed by the black ladder shaft, his shadow stretched and twisted as if something below reached for him. And though he returned each dawn, his skin was grayer, his eyes deeper, his voice lower. Guests disappeared. The town grew silent. But Holloway prospered, his accounts full, his pantry always stocked with meat. No one remembered selling him. When asked, he would only answer, "It comes from below. It always comes from below." By the spring of 1902, whispers of the Holloway Hotel reached beyond the Ozarks. Travelers passing through spoke of missing companions of luggage left behind, but never claimed. A school teacher from St. Louis named Elias took particular interest in these accounts. He was a quiet man, known for his obsession with folklore and his unshakable belief that every rumor hid a grain of truth. He checked into the Holloway Hotel under a false name, carrying only a notebook and a lantern. On his second night, he bribed one of the younger maids to tell him what she knew. Her hands trembled as she traced a cross on her chest, whispering of the iron doors, the cries below, and Holloway's nocturnal visits. She warned him not to go near the well, but Elias only smiled, saying, "If it is real, I must see it with my own eyes." At midnight, he waited until Holloway descended the ladder. His lantern flickered against the walls as he crept down after him. The shaft smelled of sulfur and stagnant water. The stone walls were slick with moss carved with strange symbols, spirals, eyes, circles, and jagged marks that pulsed as if alive. The air grew colder with each rung until his breath smoked before him. He stopped when he reached a shallow platform. From there he could see Holloway below, standing at the edge of a pit, his candle casting long shadows. He was whispering words, not of any prayer Elias had ever heard. The syllables twisted like smoke, his voice deepening until it no longer sounded human. Then Elias heard it. The sound of water shifting far below, but it was not water at all. It was movement, heavy, wet, dragging like limbs pulling through the depths. Something ancient was stirring, drawn by Holloway's chant. The pit rippled with blackness, thick and alive. Elias wrote in his notebook later, "The well does not hold water, it holds hunger. He climbed back up in silence, but his lantern dimmed as if the air itself was feeding on its flame. When Holloway returned to his quarters, his eyes were wild, his skin damp with sweat. He looked straight at Elias as if he had known he was there the entire time. He smiled, but the smile stretched too wide. His teeth seemed sharper, his tongue slower, and in a low growl he said, "You have seen too much now. The well has seen you too." Elias barely slept. He knew he would never leave Black Hollow the same man. Elias Crow awoke with a start in his narrow bed, his notebook clutched to his chest. The walls of the Holloway Hotel seemed to close in on him. The wallpaper was peeling, but in the candlelight he swore the faded flowers shifted into eyes, staring unblinking. He knew he had witnessed something that was not meant for human sight, yet he also knew that the truth was now chained to him, and he would not escape without leaving a record. So he wrote page after page, his words jagged, his ink smudged by shaking hands. He described the symbols carved in the stone and the unholy voice that seemed to crawl inside his skull as Holloway whispered into the depths. He wrote of the thing below the surface that moved like water, but breathed like flesh, and he underlined one line again and again. It is not a well. It is a mouth. The next evening, Elias followed the maid into the kitchen, where she revealed a dark secret whispered among servants for years. The well was older than the hotel, older even than the town itself. Long before Holloway raised his roof beams, settlers found the shaft hidden in the trees. They sealed it with iron and stone, but blood seemed to call it awake, and when Holloway arrived with money, land deeds, and strange books, he broke the seal and built his empire over the pit. Each year the townsfolk brought offerings under the cover of night animals. At first, but soon the offerings grew darker. They whispered that Holloway struck bargains in the shadows, promising prosperity for silence and sacrifice. Elias searched for proof, wandering into the cellar beneath the hotel. At first he found only barrels of wine, sacks of flour, crates of dried goods. But further in, he discovered an alcove filled with relics, bones arranged like altars, jars of teeth, bound in wire locks of hair, nailed into the wood. He felt a force pressing against his chest, like unseen hands, daring him to breathe. He opened his notebooks. Okay again, scrawling in frantic strokes. The townspeople are bound by fear. They are feeding something beneath us. That night he was woken by a low sound drifting through the floorboards. Not Holloway's voice this time, but dozens joined together, humming like a hive, chanting in rhythm. The well was never silent. It spoke through them all, and as Elias pressed his ear to the wood, he understood the dreadful bargain of Black Hollow. The well was no longer hidden, it was worshipped. The midnight air over the Ozarks was heavy with fog when Elias slipped from his room, guided only by the pulse of that low chant. The hallways of the Holloway Hotel were empty, yet he felt eyes tracing his every step, as if the portraits along the walls leaned forward to watch. He descended into the cellar again, and there, a door he had never seen before stood open. A lantern flickered inside, and beyond it, he heard voices gathered in unholy prayer. He crept closer, pressing himself into the shadows. The chamber he entered was not built by men. Its walls were rough stone slick with moisture, and the ceiling seemed alive with veins that pulsed faintly, like the underside of some great beast. In the center stood the well, its rim carved with the same sigils Elias had drawn in his notebook, but now he saw them glowing faintly, breathing with light. The townspeople stood in a circle, faces pale and blank, as if drained of life. Each held a candle, though the flames bent inward, drawn toward the hole, as though the pit itself inhaled. Holloway raised his hands and the chant deepened. He spoke not in English, but in a tongue that scraped against the ear, twisting vowels into knives. Elias felt his own body sway against his will, his lips threatening to mouth the words, though he did not know them. Then Holloway called for the offering. 2 men dragged forward. A boy no older than 12, his mouth-bound eyes wild with terror. The crowd did not flinch. They only hummed louder. pressing their candles closer to the well. Elias gripped the stone wall, his nails tearing as he fought the urge to cry out. He watched as Holloway took the boy's wrist, and with a knife of black iron cut a shallow line across the skin. The blood dripped into the well and the earth itself shuddered. A sound rose from the pit, not a voice but 1,000 voices tangled together, shrieking and moaning until the stone walls shook and dust rained frow. In the ceiling, the boy fainted in Holloway's arms, but the crowd swayed in ecstasy as the well exhaled a stench of sulfur and rot. Elias turned and fled into the upper halls, his heart pounding, his mind unraveling. He knew then what the hotel truly was, not a place of rest, but a mask draped over a throat that led into hell. And every guest, every servant, every townsperson was nothing more than fuel for the hunger below. Elias locked himself in his narrow hotel room, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold the pen. He wrote by candlelight, desperate to anchor his mind before the memory slipped into madness. His words tangled into spirals. Yet one line returned again and again. The well is alive. The well is feeding. He could still hear the boy's muffled sobs, still smell the stench that poured from the depths. And worst of all, he could feel the chant vibrating in his bones as though the pit had marked him, chosen him for something. Sleep would not come. When he closed his eyes, he saw faces pressed against the inside of his skull. Pale eyes staring mouths sewn shut, whispering only in thought. He awoke screaming. But when he struck the candle alight, there was no one there. Only the shadows of the room bending unnaturally as if they moved of their own will. Elias began to suspect that the hotel itself was a body, each hall a vein, each chamber an organ, and the well, its black heart pumping corruption through the wood, stone, and flesh of all who entered. By dawn he stumbled into town, desperate for a voice of reason, but none came. The villagers lowered their heads as he passed, pretending not to see him. Their silence spoke more than words. He realized they were bound by the same pact Holloway had made centuries before. Prosperity in exchange for obedience. A schoolhouse built. A market thriving. Crops bountiful. But all of it purchased with blood. Paid into the well, generation after generation. Their smiles in daylight were masks behind which terror festered. Elias returned to the inn at dusk and stared at his reflection in the warped mirror. The eyes looking back were not his own. A shadow rimmed the pupils, stretching like tendrils, and for a fleeting moment he swore the glass rippled as if water lay just behind it. He slammed his fist against the frame, and the mirror cracked in a jagged line that split his face into two halves. One side human, the other already claimed by something ancient. In his journal he wrote the most chilling sentence of all, "I am becoming its voice." And as the ink bled into the paper, Elias felt a whisper slide across his ear, though the room was empty. The well does not take, it transforms. Elias descended the grand staircase into the dimly lit parlor, where Holloway sat waiting as though he had known Elias would come. The old man's suit was immaculate, his silver hair brushed back, his smile calm yet. Beneath that calmness, Elias sensed a predator measuring its prey. Holloway gestured for him to sit, and when Elias refused, the innkeeper's smile widened. "You have seen too much," his voice low but carrying the weight of command. "You feel it within you now, the calling that none can resist. The well has chosen you as it once chose me." Elias demanded answers. Where did it come from? What is it beneath us? Holloway's eyes gleamed like lantern light on oil. He spoke slowly as if savoring every word. Before the settlers, before the first cabins rose in these hills, the natives knew of the hollow. They called it the maw of the earth. They told stories of a serpent without end, coiled in the dark, that hungered not for flesh alone, but for the devotion of men. They sealed it, believing they had silenced its hunger, but hunger does not die. It waits. I broke their seal. I made the pact and the hollow became mine. Elias felt his skin crawl. The images burned into his mind. A vast thing sleeping yet awake, its body stretching through caverns for miles. its mouth disguised as a well. Holloway leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Do not think of it as a curse. Think of it as power. Every offering is an exchange, and every exchange leaves us stronger, richer, more eternal. The townspeople do not fear me. They fear what would happen if I ever stopped feeding it. For a moment, Elias felt the pull of those words, a cold logic that almost made sense. The prosperity of the valley, the endless fortune of the hotel, all tied to a hunger kept satisfied by sacrifice. Yet his soul recoiled. He saw again the boy's blood dripping into the pit, saw the candles bending toward the dark, saw his own reflection with shadowed eye. Holloway reached into his coat and slid a small book across the table, its pages yellow with age. It was filled with symbols that twisted the stomach to read. The Book of the Hollow, he called it, a guide to shaping the world through the mouth in the earth. Elias backed away, his breath ragged. The well had chosen him, Holloway had said. But Elias swore in that moment that if the hollow demanded his soul, it would choke before it swallowed him whole. Elias staggered back to his room, the cursed book pressed against his chest, as though it weighed far more than paper and ink. He had not wanted to touch it, but Holloway had forced it into his hands, and leaving it behind felt impossible. The pages whispered when he opened them, strange letters writhing like living things, his mind bending as he tried to focus. He read until his eyes bled with exhaustion, symbols that unlocked doors not of wood or stone but of thought, incantations that promised command over flesh, shadow, and fire, rituals requiring sacrifice, every line dripping with the stench of old blood. It was a manual for communion with the well, not written by Holloway, nor any settler but by something else, something that had crawled through minds long before the Ozarks had a name. Elias wanted to burn it, yet he knew fire would not consume it. The book was bound in something thicker than leather, and the words carved deeper than ink. He shoved it under the mattress, but still he heard it whisper through the night, calling him with promises of knowledge, strength, even immortality. He paced his small room, whispering prayers, but each prayer sounded hollow, like an echo bouncing off cavern walls. Already he felt his grip on himself loosening. Already he dreamed with eyes open, seeing flickers of the boy in the well, seeing shadows at the foot of his bed, swaying as if chanting in silence. By morning he resolved on one truth. He could not escape by running. The townspeople were bound. Holloway was bound. The land itself was bound. The only way to sever the chain was to face the heart of it. Elias would not feed the well. He would not bend his knee. He would descend, not as a worshipper, but as a saboteur. His hands shook, but his resolve hardened as he scrawled in his notebook. The well is not a shrine. It is a wound, and wounds can be cut deeper until they bleed out. That evening, he slipped into the cellar, again carrying only his candle and the book he despised. He pressed his hand against the cold stones and whispered to himself again and again, "I am not yours. I am not yours." But when he reached the rim of the well, he felt heat rise from below, as though the hollow itself laughed, and in that laugh, Elias knew the battle ahead would not be one of strength, but of will and madness. The rope was coarse against Elias's palms as he lowered himself into the well. The air grew hotter with every foot he descended, the stones slick with moisture that tasted of iron. His candle sputtered but refused to die, as though even the flame was drawn downward, eager to see what lay below. The chanting in his mind grew louder, though above him there was no sound. The walls throbbed faintly, and at times he thought he felt them pulse against his back, like he was crawling down the throat of something alive. The shaft narrowed, then widened again, opening into a cavern, vast beyond reason. The candle revealed little yet. Elias sensed the immensity of it. A breath passed across him heavy and damp, as if the cave itself exhaled. He crept forward, and his foot struck something solid. Bones, countless bones piled like driftwood at the edge of a black pool, skulls hollow-eyed staring into eternity. Ribs, cracked jaws, twisted and scattered, and above them, carved into the cavern floor, were the same sigils from the book, but here they glowed faintly like veins of fire. He knelt beside the pool, his reflection rippling but wrong. The face staring back had eyes like Holloway's, rimmed in shadow lips, already moving though Elias was silent. The water shifted, and in its depths, something vast stirred. A coil thicker than a tree trunk rolled beneath the surface, scales glistening faintly with a sickly sheen. A single pale eye opened below the water and fixed on him, unblinking, vast and lidless. It did not blink because it did not need to. It only watched and waited. A voice rose in Elias's skull, not from outside, but from inside, whispering in 1,000 tongues, and yet clear as thought. You are mine now. The book was merely a lure. You were led here not by Holloway, not by chance, but by hunger eternal. The cavern shook and water sloshed at his knees. Bones rattled and rolled like dice across the stone. Elias clutched his key, handled tighter, but the flame bent down toward the water, as though even fire bowed to the eye beneath. Elias whispered through clenched teeth, I am not yours. But even as he spoke, the shadow in his reflection smiled wider than his mouth could stretch, and in that moment he knew the battle had only begun. For the well did not demand worship alone. It demanded surrender of the self, until nothing human remained. The cavern seemed to close in around Elias, though the space was endless. His candle shook in his grip, but the shadows it cast were not his own. They stretched across the walls like figures in procession, bending, kneeling, offering themselves to the pit. He could hear their cries, though none were alive. The well was forcing him to witness its memory, forcing him to drink the history carved in blood. The first settlers appeared gaunt and broke in their axes, still dripping with sap, as they dragged captives into the hollow. Their mouths opened in prayer, not to God but to the abyss. They slit throats and poured the blood into the water. The pool swallowed it eagerly, and each time the cavern shook with approval, the vision shifted, and Elias saw Holloway young and sharp-eyed, clutching the same book that now weighed against Elias's chest. Holloway's voice rang clear and confident as he read from the pages. His words twisted the air, his offering a child bound in rope. His knife descended, and the cavern roared its approval. Prosperity flooded into Holloway's life after that. The hotel rose. The town thrived, but every coin, every loaf, every smile was rooted in that sacrifice. Elias felt the boy scream as though it were his own. His veins seared with the memory of the blade. Then the vision tore wider, and Elias saw something that chilled him. Beyond the sacrifices, he saw generations. Each decade the faces changed, but the ritual remained. The townspeople came willingly, their heads bowed, their voices humming in unison. Mothers, fathers, children all bound in the same cycle of obedience. He saw their bones added to the pile, saw the same eye in the water, opening again and again like a clock, striking the hour of death. He realized then this was not worship. This was assimilation. The hollow was not fed by sacrifice alone. It was fed by repetition, by obedience, by the endless cycle of submission. Elias screamed for two. He visioned to end, but the echoes only multiplied. His reflection in the black pool opened its mouth and whispered, "You are next." The eye blinked once, and the cavern fell into silence. Elias collapsed to his knees, gasping his candle. Guttering, he clawed at his notebook, scribbling one frantic line over and over. The well remembers, and it never forgets. He knew he had glimpsed the true weight of the curse. The people were not simply victims. They were willing participants, slaves who had learned to love their chains. Elias staggered from the vision, his lungs clawing for air, as though the cavern had drained them of breath. The notebook burned against his chest, not with heat, but with a pressure that felt alive. He ripped it free and hurled it toward the pool. But the book did not sink. Instead, it hovered just above the black water, its pages flapping as if caught by an invisible wind. A voice spilled from its parchment, low, resonant, commanding. It was the same voice he had heard in the town, whispered through smiles and handshakes. The voice of submission disguised as survival. Elias roared in defiance, snatching the book before the well could reclaim it. He sprinted toward the cavern mouth, the shadows slamming into him like unseen hands clawing at his skin. But he did not stop. He fell to his knees at the stone altar and raised the book above his head. His mind screamed, "Burn it! Burn it now!" His lantern flames licked at the leather cover, but the book resisted its flesh, bubbling without catching fire. Pages tore loose and swirled in the air around him. Each page contained a name, a ritual, a memory of sacrifice. Every single one clawed to return to the pool. Elias bared his teeth and fed them into the fire one by one until his fingers blistered from the heat. The cavern howled like a beast in agony. The black water boiled, sending up clouds of smoke that stank of flesh and rust. The walls shivered dust raining from the ceiling. Bones tumbled from their resting places as though the well itself was vomiting up its secrets. Elias screamed above the chaos, his voice raw and ragged. The cycle ends here. No more blood, no more chains, no more lies. His words echoed back at him, splitting into hundreds of voices, some pleading, some cursing, some laughing. The town's history was unraveling in real time, and he was tearing at the threads. The final page resisted most of all its letters, twisting on the parchment like worms' writhings, G under sunlight. It showed him his own name scrawled in ink that dripped like fresh blood. The well had already chosen him, already written him into its story. Elias stared at it, his hands trembling with fury and dread. Then with a cry that shook the cavern, he forced the page into the fire. It shrieked like a living thing curling to ash. The pool erupted, a column of black water surging upward before collapsing back into silence. The eye that had watched him closed with a final shudder. The cavern was dead. The curse broken, or so he thought. Elias stumbled out of the hollow, his clothes soaked with sweat and blood, his lungs dragging in the cold night air. For a moment he thought he was free. The forest above the cavern was silent, the moon pale and distant. The weight of centuries seemed to lift from his shoulders, but as he pushed through the trees into the edge of town, he froze. Every single window was lit, as though the entire village had been waiting for him. Figures stood in the doorways, their faces pale, their eyes wide and unblinking. They greeted him, not with relief, not with anger, but with smiles. Empty, practiced smiles that stretched too wide like masks worn too long. The mayor stepped forward, his voice, calm, smooth, dripping with the cadence of a sermon. "You have done what none before you could. Elias, you have freed us from the weight of the well. And yet do you not see? You did not break the chain. You simply forged a new link." Elias gripped the scorched notebook tighter, though half burned. It still pulsed faintly in his hands. He wanted to hurl it into the night, but something inside whispered that it would return no matter where he threw it. He stared at the people of Holloway and saw the truth. Their obedience was not broken. Their minds were not theirs. They did not need the well anymore because now they had him. The mayor's smile sharpened. "You will carry the knowledge now, you will guide us. The blood has been spilled, and the debt is balanced. For another 100 years, perhaps longer, we shall endure because of you." The crowd nodded in unison, their movements too perfect, their eyes too vacant. Elias shook his head, his throat raw with defiance. "No, I destroyed it. I ended it. The curse is gone." The mayor stepped closer, his shadow falling across Elias. "The curse is never gone. It only changes its vessel." At that moment, Elias felt the weight of every ritual, every sacrifice pressing down on his skull. He felt the voices of the dead Croy, awling beneath his skin, whispering their eternal hunger. He dropped to his knees, clutching his temples as the villagers closed in around him. Their hands reached for him, not in violence, but in reverence, like parishioners bowing before a prophet. The notebook pulsed brighter, its ash pages glowing faintly, as though rewritten in real time. Elias wanted to run, but the hollow truth had already sunk its claws into him. He was no longer merely Elias. He was the keeper of the well. Even though the water was gone, the curse had escaped the earth and climbed inside his chest. The villagers gathered around Elias, their shapes wavering in the glow of lantern light. Their faces no longer appeared as individuals, but as one expression stretched across many mouths. The same smile, the same hollow devotion. They whispered in one voice, though no lips seemed to move. The keeper has risen. The hunger has chosen. Elias tried to push them back, but their touch was cold and weightless, like mist wrapping around him. The burned notebook throbbed in his hand, and when he tried to drop it, his fingers refused to let go. It was as though the veins in his wrist had grown into the spine of the book, binding him body and soul. He staggered into the square, and the villagers followed like shadows unbroken. The mayor raised both arms high and spoke in a tone that seemed older than the stones beneath their feet. The well is no more, yet the cycle remains. The earth has given its hunger to flesh and blood, and through him it shall endure. He turned to Elias and bowed deeply, and then the rest of the town bent low, as though he were not a man, but an altar. Elias cried out, "Stop this! I am not your priest, not your vessel. I will not feed this curse." But his voice was drowned by the sound that rose from within him, a faint gnawing echo that did not come from his throat, but from the pit of his chest. The hunger had moved into him. He could feel it tasting the night air through his lungs. He doubled over, clutching his stomach, not from illness, but from need, a terrible bottomless need. The villagers chanted, "Keeper, keeper, keeper," and each time they spoke the word he felt his own heart stutter, and the pull of something deep inside him respond. He looked into their eyes and realized they no longer saw him at all. They saw the hollow itself, given legs and voice. They saw the well reborn in a man. Elias stumbled backwards into the chapel steps. The wood beneath his boots trembled as if bowing to him in the lanty. Earned flames bent toward his body. He screamed again, desperate to deny what he felt, but already his veins burned with a black glow, faint but spreading like roots beneath the skin. He understood then that the curse could not be killed, only carried. It had slipped from stone into blood, from ground into flesh, and he had been chosen as its vessel, not by fate, not by chance, but by the greed and sins of those before him. The Holloway name had not ended the chain. It had only ensured he would be its next link. Elias sank against the chapel door, his breath ragged, his mind torn between defiance and surrender. The villagers stood silent, waiting patient as if time itself bowed to this ritual. The black glow in his veins spread faster now, crawling up his arms, coiling around his neck. He pressed his forehead to the wooden door, whispering to himself, I will not be the hollow. I will not be the hunger." Yet even as he said it, a low growl stirred from deep within his chest, a voice that was not his own murmuring, "Feed and be whole." He thought of his father's journal, the warning scrawled in frantic ink, "Burn the well or be bound." He thought of the Holloway Hotel, its fine halls echoing with the laughter of men who built fortunes on silence. He thought of the victims, swallowed by the dark, the bones that had never been mourned, and in that moment he realized this was never about him alone. It was about a cycle older than the hotel, older than the town, older than any man. The hunger was not evil, nor good. It was a law written into the soil, a covenant of decay and renewal, and he was chosen not because he was worthy, but because he was there. He clenched the journal until his nails broke skin. Blood dripped onto the pages, and the ink shimmered, rising like smoke. His vision blurred, and he saw the villagers not as people, but as husks, shells emptied long ago and filled with the hollow's breath. Their smiles were masks. Their worship was compulsion. He knew then that the only way to end it was to starve the hunger from within himself, not to feed, not to surrender, but to rot with it until nothing remained. He rose unsteady, his eyes burning with a strange fire. He shouted into the night, "You will not use me! You will not eat through me!" The villagers shrieked in unison, a sound that made the earth quake. They lunged forward, but Elias ripped open the journal and slammed it against his chest. The pages ignited without. Flame, searing his flesh. The hunger howled inside him, clawing desperate. But Elias held it tighter, pressing the cursed book into his own heart until the words and the veins fused as one. His body convulsed as though struck by lightning. His mouth opened in a silent scream as shadows poured from his skin, evaporating into the night. The villagers collapsed one by one as the force broke its hold, and for the first time in a century, the square echoed with silence. The silence did not last long. The villagers lay scattered like fallen dolls, their eyes blank, their chests rising and falling with shallow breaths. Elias staggered among them, smoke still rising from the burns across his chest. The journal had fused into his skin, its words now etched into his flesh like a living scripture. His every movement sent a ripple of pain through his body. Yet beneath the agony was a strange clarity. He felt the hunger still, but weaker, distant. No longer inside him, but circling like a predator, locked beyond a wall. He stumbled toward the Holloway Hotel, its silhouette looming against the horizon, like a mausoleum of secrets. The windows were dark, the walls sagging with rot. Yet as he drew closer, he swore he heard faint whispers drifting from the well buried in its cellar, the same well that had fed on generations, the same well that had promised wealth and power in exchange for silence. Elias pressed his hand to his chest, and the words burned brighter, urging him to step inside, urging him to finish what had begun. He pushed the heavy doors open and walked into the shadows. The air was colder than the grave. The halls of the hotel stretched before him, impossibly long, twisting in ways no human architecture could explain. He felt the hunger pulse through the wood, through the stone, through the very air. He followed the whispers down into the cellar, where the earth smelled of iron and damp rot. The well waited its mouth yawning wide, its stones blackened with centuries of offerings. Elias stood at its edge, his reflection rippling in the dark water, but the face that stared back was not his. It was older, gaunt, hollow eyes burning with endless night. He leaned closer, and the water trembled. A voice rose from its depths, promising him freedom, promising him power, promising him release, if he would only let the words inscribed in his skin sink back into the abyss. He closed his eye, as the weight of 100 generations pressing down upon him. He could give in and end the torment, or he could refuse and seal the hunger within himself forever. He whispered to the water, "You will not have me. You will not have them." He tore open his shirt, exposing the seared flesh, the living scripture, and without hesitation he leapt into the well. The water swallowed him whole. His scream echoed once, then vanished. The villagers outside awoke, their eyes clear, their minds their own for the first time in memory. They staggered to the square, looking to the hotel as it groaned and shuddered. The ground split stone by stone until the entire building collapsed inward, consumed by the earth. A cloud of dust rose into the night, and when it cleared, there was nothing where the hotel had stood. Only a crater, a scar in the land that no one would approach again. Some say, Elias died in that well. Others whisper, he still walks the Ozarks, carrying the hunger bound in his chest, cursed to wander until the last word fades from his flesh. But all agree on one truth. The Holloway Hotel was erased from history, not because men forgot, but because men were forced to forget. And the curse of Black Hollow, though chained, still breathes beneath the soil, waiting for the day someone dares to listen once more.